Welcome people to the World Wide Web, and it's another video for you today. So what am I talking about? So this is basically a deconstruction, a video that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it is all about quality, quantity and toys. So hopefully you'll join me in this journey, in this little story, this video. It could be long, it could be short, but we'll take a ride through it. So obviously I'm a kid of the 80s, and this is the toy that I grew up with. So this isn't the original one. This is one I got a few years ago. Years in 1988 action figure. So obviously it has the arms. Maybe it moves a little stiff over time. Head. Legs move, doesn't stand, as you can tell from the feet, doesn't stand particularly all too well. Obviously that's why they had the base points for them, and not apart from a few colours, there isn't much to it. So this is why the discuss. So I'll explain a little bit. So obviously I'm quite a modern toy collector now, and I've been seeing a lot of issues pop online, and I've mentioned these before, and I'll throw a few pictures up here. You'll see like the Dungeons and Dragons. There's a few from Rambling Toys, and Rambling Toys I'll get specifically on later. But I've just, you know, even me, I complain about NECA all the time, but I still buy NECA toys, and there is this kind of overall feeling I get from the community, you know, with figures being broken, turning up, you know, they're wrong painted, missing paint apps, all this stuff. There is so much of this around that it does kind of leave a negative taste a little bit in your mouth. So I decided to create this video. So I took a bit of time, I did a little bit of research, and just wanted to soak it all in. And to be honest, my views from when I started to create this video to now have actually almost flipped. So 180. So my views of I was very much, when I created this video, I was like, you know, we pay for figures, they should be perfect, they should be brilliant, you know, we shouldn't have to deal with this stuff, we shouldn't have to fix it, stuff's getting expensive, you know. And I understand that obviously there are a lot of factors in this. Now this is where my realization comes into and something. So as I say, like, you know, I was brought up with kids like this. Obviously we had He-Man. I don't own any of He-Man, but obviously, you know, this is where the 80s toys were, you know, move the legs, move the arms, I think. Yeah, so a little bit of articulation, not a lot of paint. Obviously it had a few accessories and pumps, and that was it. Obviously you go to our day and age, I'm knocking stuff over, this is what we have now. And this is where my mind was sitting when I was creating this video. Like, he's got almost as much articulation on his arms and his head than this guy complete and utterly has. I don't know how much these were back in the day. I imagine probably some like 10 pounds or something. Obviously this guy's, I think it cost me about 30. So yeah, prices do change, materials do change. Obviously you see the paint that is involved, all the different shading, all the different textures and stuff. So there is that to consider. But obviously this is what I had in my mind. So I thought, well, I grew up with this. So 30 odd years later and we've got this, you know, there is no comparison. You know, this is so much far better, you know, and this is where I made the mistake that I'm pretty much everybody out there has done, and this is where I'm getting to it. Right, this is an 80s toy, this is a 90s toy. These were all kind of base cheap toys when they come out. Look, they've got the same sort of, okay, he's got a tail articulation, and a little bit more on the neck, but this is like a simple toy. Now, we never grew up with Hot Toys, or I never grew up with Hot Toys. I never grew up with Marvel Legends. I never grew up with, you know, the bigger fixes like Mezco and all these companies making all these figures. You know, we are inundated as adults because they know all these kids that have grown up with stuff like this want stuff like this. And this is where the mindset comes of. We assumed that what we had as a child, this base figure that cost 10 quid, that was cheap, you know, quite easy to make and not much articulation, and it's a tenner. It was a lot back then days. I assume it was a tenner, it could be 5 or I don't know, obviously I was a child, I didn't know the concept of money then. Obviously as adults and working, obviously when you're paying 30 odd quid for a figure, then obviously it's a little bit different, but it's still good quality. Obviously I know people have had issues with Lees, obviously this comes from NECA I believe, and you know, with the joints I've not really had an issue with any of these or sticking or anything, whether that was just a set I've got, but that's, you know, this is the comparison, and you're like, actually we, you know, currently now we've got a lot better toys. But again, as I say, I made the mistake, and this is where the mistake is. In the day, this was the figures that you get. These were the base core figures. Obviously you had other figures and stuff like this. There was no higher tier, there was no multiple range of multiple versions of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from different lines and stuff. And if this was the base figure for back in the day and there was no higher class, then what you should actually compare this to is this figure. Now I know a lot of people don't like this line, fair enough. This is Leonardo, obviously, as you can see. Now if you compare them, their swords, yeah, they've got a little bit more snazzier. Paint, still kind of the same. Obviously he's got a little bit red on his face and eyes. And then the back, you know, a little bit more different colour on the pack. Obviously, yes, their arms, they've got more pivots here and at the knees, and obviously a little bit more movement at the feet. This is the comparison we should be making. And this is why my thought mindset, I was annoyed. I was like, well, you know, if we had this, you know, nowadays technology is coming, we should have amazing. No, this is a core figure, a basic figure, and this is what we got back in the day. Now they didn't have higher toys because obviously toys were more coming in with like Transformers stuff, and even if you look at Transformers, they were basic, they were bulky. I mean, I think Optimus Prime was about the most realistic Transformer there, and he didn't have too much changing of it in comparison to the Transformers we have now. So you take all those extra steps in, but I mean, you take a basic Transformer from the 80s and you compare it to a basic Transformer now, you'll see that actually there has been quite improvements. Obviously the plastic is quite thin and stuff, and that's just down to real world issues that, you know, we can't produce loads and loads of plastic. It's not you know, it's not ever flowing. There is a limit, so this is where they have to find new methods and make hollow stuff. Well, obviously this is a core figure, like I say, 5-10 quid. I say, I could be wrong, if you are, tell me that. Right. Now this is a base core figure. Now obviously this came out a few years ago, I think. Obviously he has two swords, but obviously he's got more articulation and stuff like that. And if you have a look, you know, it is a basic colour palette. Weapons, you just have a belt, which is one kind of colour. You know, obviously it's got a little bit around the buckle there, same as there. Sorry, he keeps dropping his, you know, he comes with two swords and he comes with a little bit, so he comes with a little bit more. So that has evolved a little bit, but not too much if you consider that 80s, 2000s and 20s, so 30 years apart, the articulation, stuff like that, and it's come a little bit more realistic. But that's what we should be comparing. We shouldn't go this figure, which is a far upgrade of this guy and cost a lot more to rent. There is no comparison, and this is where I think everybody is under that false pretense of how we should compare these figures. Now the core figure has evolved. We, you know, I say we've got more articulation and stuff. Rubbish for holding weapons. And then we'll be like, you know, he is if he can move his legs completely around, you can see all the little points of articulation and stuff. And there's loads, and the fact you can even stand them up, because God, turtles. I know I love them, I do collect them, but who thought of these for actually standing up? I mean, I you know, even like the monkey type foot soldiers, and even Shredder and stuff. I mean, even Leatherhead, who's got such a low centre of gravity, still falls over, even, you know. And it's, where was the concept in that? Whereas this actually considers that you can have it, you can pose it and stuff. And you know, 30 years evolution, I think they've come quite far for still cheap. I think these are like, were only like 10 quid when they come out, maybe £8-9 where they come. They weren't too expensive on the grand scheme of things today. But what we are doing is we go, no, it's not the core figure. What we would now class as the core figure, because we have more money and we can afford stuff like NECA and that. that this is what we class as a core figure. And obviously, what would then be maybe the toys when we were younger, like Turtles, maybe you get like the wagon or something, which was probably like 50 quid or something, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 times the price of this. Now, the price of that is obviously the really expensive stuff, like the Thunder Tank and that they're doing on stuff. So everything is actually realistically in relation. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all the issues. I do think that obviously like with NECA and stuff, and if you can improve like loose joints, I do feel if you're producing something, you know, as if it was me, if it was my company, I'd want them to produce the best quality they can and have better quality control. Now, for some reason, that seems to have gone downhill quite a lot. I don't know. I don't work in that industry. I have no idea why that is. I assume it's cost. They cut down on one thing, they cut down on quality control, they cut down on people and stuff, and that money then goes to more profit to higher ups, I suspect. You've seen Hasbro laying off thousands of people and stuff there, you know, as much as we're complaining like, oh, you know, our toys are breaking and stuff like that, there's thousands of people around the world that are losing their jobs for these companies because the companies aren't making enough money. And that is, I think, something you have to be a little bit more wary about. Now, I say every company's different and something, and this is where, like, you know, I've gone from paying like £10 a figure to like £30 a figure, and I say as far as the higher I go up, I think it's about £60 a figure, and they're the gargoyles that you've seen. I have Transformers that are more, but I haven't really bought anything there. Zords, I think it's sitting a little bit of different range, but I still, if you split them up, I still probably have only paid 20-30 quid per Zord. It's not been that expensive. And this is where my limit is. As a realistic collector, as an adult, having mortgages, bills and everything, that's where I can go. Maybe I can treat myself on the odd occasion, but I can't treat to go to that bracket. And this is where I wanted to get on Ram and Toys. And I don't mean to point at specifically them. This is just some of the information, and I'll be throwing a few pictures up here and stuff. And this is where the realisation comes. Now, when they first came out, I did sign up to get their Commandos figures. I then cancelled my pre-orders, and the reason because I saw a lot of hate in the comments, and it wasn't mainly that, it was because someone had raised the point that if you pay through PayPal, you can only query it up to the first 6 months, and these figures were only going to be delivered after the 6 months, and that was when, you know, and if you have to wait over 6 months, you know, Ram and Toys could have not done anything, and everybody would have been screwed. They'd have no leg to stand on, and to be honest, that was too much of a gamble at the time. I think I was near the process of buying a house. I had bought a house, so I wasn't actually as flush with cash as I have been at times. And that's it. And since then, like Ram and Toys, like they bring a new figure out, it's like £80-90, and I realistically, I know there are collectors out there and they probably have more money than me and situations, but I feel that's, you know, for the lower end, they're not tailoring for the lower end collector anymore now. This is more higher ends of where they are. Now, they may be worth it. You know, I have seen their models, they do look good. I've never had one in hand, I can only speculate. The thing that gets me is when you go from something like this, which is 30 quid, which obviously you do have breakages in your query with them and stuff like this. But I mean, for the most part, I've never really had an issue with any of my Turtles figures. You know, some gargoyles and that I've had to heat up, and some other figures like the Defenders of the Earth and stuff I've had to heat up in little bits, but they're not too, even Dungeons and Dragons, a little bit, they can be a little bit breaky, but as long as you treat heat, and that's fine. The thing that gets me, I know Ram and Toys are an independent company and have to pay more and their overheads and everything like that, but when stuff is being delivered like the Silverhawks, there was bits where the magnets were falling out, and they're like, well, here's some guidelines, you can just put some glue on there and put it up. And I'm like, well, if you know about this, why are you not going and putting that glue on there yourself and doing that? Why is somebody having to pay like £90 for a figure that you're producing as a newer company, and then you're having to fix it when it turns up? Like, those are the bits that I question it. I say, again, I'm not purposely pointing this at Ram and Toys, I'm just using that as an example. It's the same way with like Power Rangers, where their heads are snapping off and, you know, stuff isn't. That why as consumers should we be having to go the extra step? And I get it, in our heads we had this, and to be honest, how much can you go wrong? And even when you look at this and you think, oh, it's quite cool, you can see that the paint isn't always good around all the different points. You know, they've missed that edge bit of the shell and stuff like this. But we were kids, we never complained. As we're adults, we have that different viewpoint in ourselves, and you know, and that's just something I want to. So you know, I could talk on for ages, but yeah, it's just, this is where my mind is at, and I just wanted to kind of put this out there. I mean, if your views are different, please do put them in a comment. You know, I say I'm not purposely bashing any companies or anything, but this is where my mind is at, because as I said, when I started thinking this video, I was sitting there and go, this is what we had, this is what I had. God, this is so much far better. Why isn't the quality, you know, proven? You know, we deserve it. I'm paying 30 quid for this. Well, no. If I'm paying 120 quid, 150, 200 for a Hot Toys, then yes, if anything's wrong, they damn well deserve to fix it. But when I'm paying minimal money, yes, there is some consideration that obviously you just have to be careful, or maybe heating up, or maybe they're trying to skip on some steps to save some money, to maybe save some people's jobs, or to make more money for other people. Who knows? But we have to understand that this figure is not this figure, and this figure should be compared to this figure, because these are core figures, and that we should, anything, we should be happy that we don't just have, like, they go, this is the turtle figure out, that's it. There ain't any other figures, there ain't any other factories, there ain't any other brands. This is the only turtle figure you get. Who would be happy with that? You know, this was never created because obviously companies never thought you could spend a bit more money and get a better quality figure. And I think, or personally, that is my view. I think, you know, to say in some cases maybe the companies do need a bit of flack and stuff and do improvement, but I also think as buyers we need to be a little bit more conscious of actually what we are comparing and what we actually expect, and compared to what we're actually paying. Anyway, I've been Cypher Sigma. This has been my analysis of toys for of the improvement or deprovement, or whatever you want, the toys for the line. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.